Okay, welcome Chief Mark Stainbrook and Superintendent John Boldock to our podcast about policing and social justice. In full disclosure, we've all known each other for more than a few years. We've kind of worked together at the Port of San Diego, and now Mark Stainbrook is the Chief of Harbor Police at the Port, and John Boldock is the Superintendent of Nebraska State Police?
State Patrol.
State Patrol. So we have that connection. We were all in San Diego at the Port for a little bit, and then we kind of all went out our own different ways. But I've always had, and I'm not trying to kiss up to anyone, a lot of respect for you guys, how you conduct business, some of the training you put on for Port staff. I learned a lot. I still think about it, and how you guys supported each other, and especially with so much that's happened with policing and social injustice issues over the past year during COVID and now in 2021. I wanted to really hear from you about how we as maybe public servants or the public service community can better serve our communities, what we've learned the past year and how we could do things better. What kind of conversations could we promote? So with that, maybe I'll just want to start with Mark. Tell us a little bit about your background. How did you end up in this position? And then I'll switch to John.
Well, that's a long story. It'll only take about 30 minutes to like your podcast. So actually, I never wanted to be a police officer. I always wanted to be a military officer, and I ended up being a reserve officer while I was in college in Vermont for actually the state police and a couple smaller agencies. And I loved it. And so when I went in the military, I became a military police. And then I stayed in the reserve, so I continued my military career, but I went to LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, for 17 years. And then I really had this idea in my mind that I could do more, and I wanted to be a chief of police somewhere. So at the time, Chief Boldock was gracious enough to hire me. And so he always says he's an amateur talent scout. And so I went to work for Harbor Police for about 6 years as the assistant chief. And then when he was called on by the governor of Nebraska to be the superintendent there, I was promoted to chief. So thanks for that, Chief. Appreciate it.
John, how did you come to the Port?
Well, I've been in law enforcement at that time 23 and a half years.
Wow.
Mostly in Minnesota. In fact, all of that was in Minnesota. I was a police officer in Maple Grove, which is a Twin City suburb. And then I became a police chief in a small town, Mora, Minnesota. Then I went to a bigger town, Brainerd, Minnesota. And once our kids graduated from high school and headed off to college, my wife and I looked at each other as empty nesters, and it was 30 below zero. And we said, "What's next?" She says, "Let's move someplace warm."
Yeah.
So we ended up in San Diego, and it was great. We enjoyed it. We spent a lot of time at the beach. I learned how to surf. I got asked the question many, many times, what's the difference between policing in Minnesota and San Diego? And my answer was always, there's no difference. Just the climate is different. Challenges, the opportunities, the people that you meet, the people you serve, it's all the same. Just the environment is different. Same answer moving from San Diego to Nebraska. It's the same challenges, opportunities. We're in the people business. So you need people who are going to be, have the heart of a servant to get out there and provide the service that the community expects. And the environment is different. We have some counties where there are more cattle than people. So that has its own unique challenges. But really, policing is policing no matter what the environment. And I've learned that in my travel through 3 different states now. And I still believe that to this day.
Wow. I think that's very insightful. That's good to know. Most people wouldn't assume that. They would feel like it's a completely different style, but it's good to know that there's a consistency there. So much has changed in our world last year, 2020, with the George Floyd incident. I remember I saw a lot of public statements from police departments all around the country about what happened. I wonder if each of you could reflect on how you felt your world changed before the incident, and then after. What had changed about your policing practices, your direction to your staff, your community? What was different? And maybe, John, we could still stay with you, and then we'll go back to Mark.
Certainly. Well, first of all, I had a very unique perspective because I worked in Hennepin County, where Minneapolis is located. I worked there for the first 12 years of my career. So I had a particular insight into that department and some views that I had formed on my own through my observations and experience. And so that might have been a little bit different than some of my colleagues. And my initial reaction when I first had time to watch the video, it was about 48 hours or so before I had a chance to watch the video. And I was immediately struck by the glaring difference between what our expectations are in the standard of care for someone in our custody and the behavior that was displayed by the officers, in particular the arresting officer in that case. So I didn't make a public statement. Many of my colleagues immediately went out and made a public statement. My governor did. So there was certainly no need to upstage him. In fact, I think it's a lesson we all learned is don't get ahead of the mayor or the governor.
Right.
But I immediately did a video to our agency, which it's pretty typical for me to do a video email. So I'll do a video and I'll send it out. Our team has been very receptive to that style of communication, and they appreciate it because it's coming from me. It's my voice. There's no interpretation through the chain of command, right? So I did a video saying, basically, look, we've all seen this video, and I need you all to ask yourself, does the care and compassion or lack thereof that was displayed in that video comport with our rules and our expectations? And the answer was overwhelmingly no. And it was like the end of the discussion. It was like, we don't treat people like that. It's not our expectation. And if somebody did treat somebody like that, there would be consequences, immediate consequences. So there wasn't really even any debate. And so I was very proud of our team. There was none of this, well, we weren't there. We don't have the whole story. They could see it unfold in front of their eyes. Now, I'd be the first to say that a piece of video is just one piece of evidence. Okay, so don't hang your hat on one video. Many people have done that, and in the aftermath of this, it's unfortunately one of the unintended consequences. Is we see a lot of people rushing to judgment with not all of the facts. I felt pretty comfortable that I and our team could discern that what they saw was wrong, and there was just no debate about it.
Mark, how was your world changed before and after?
So like everyone, and I agree with everything John just said, and I'll add some things that I thought about after seeing the video, which personally disgusted me. But the first thing I thought of, and I'll look at it from a totally technical point of view, I was like, how are these officers trained, or how have they been trained? They didn't appear to recognize a medical emergency,
Right.
And what we call, and we're trained on in California, excited delirium and positional asphyxia, and the combination of the two. And we know that can be deadly for in custody issues. So I look at it strictly from, at that time, kind of a technical point of view. And the interesting thing for me with the video, and officers always discuss these videos that we see nationally on tactics and training, and you kind of debrief it, and sometimes you use it in your own training as how do we do it, how was it done, how could it be done better, or what did they do good or bad, and you'll get all kinds of different opinions. This was one of the first, I think the first video I ever saw that when you talk to other officers, there was no one that had a differing opinion of what were these guys doing. It was wrong. Their training seemed poor, and they didn't seem to take the care of the individual, recognizing it was at the very least a medical emergency. And there's so many things they could have done. So what we did at Harbor Police, because I wanted to make sure all my officers understood, and it wasn't just because of George Floyd incident, but a lot of laws had changed in the past year. There was de-escalation training that we've been pushing out across the county, as well as to my officers. But we had actually an 8-hour stand down training day where we brought in people to talk about the new laws, mental illness, excited delirium, positional asphyxia. And then we also brought in a member of the community to talk about kind of what they saw. And that's a whole different discussion. He was a very interesting speaker. But how how they came at it from a community, or he came at it from a community perspective, which was enlightening for the officers. So we kind of took a holistic approach to it. And because I wanted to make sure every one of my officers was properly and appropriately trained to handle that type of situation and more. And that's, I think, as our role as leaders in law enforcement, you know, we have to be absolutely sure our officers are ready to handle those critical incidents.
You know, you talked about training, so I have a question. I'll stay with you, Mark, about what kind of qualities do you look for in a new recruit and in future leaders? Because that matters, right? I mean, you must be looking for something special that stands out other than they passed all the tests.
Well, absolutely. So I think if you ask, the first question you always ask a new police candidate is, why do you want to be a police officer? And 99.9% of the time, except one interview that Chief Bolduc and I had with one individual, he'll remember, says, I just want to help people. I just want to help people. Yeah. And I really think that is why most of us get into policing. We really see it as an opportunity to help somebody or multiple people every day.
Right.
I'll tell you what's done the country a disservice, and that's TV and the movies.
Right.
It did a picture of policing and the way policing's done, or you know, and it can wrap everything up in 60 minutes of a movie or a TV show, but also kind of like, this is how police are, should be. That's not an accurate picture. Literally 98% of the things police officers do are mundane. They're boring. It's a lot of paperwork, a lot of, you know, going out, looking for things, responding to calls. And it's that small percentage of the time that's a lot of excitement, action. So you have to go from 0 to 60 very quickly. But I'm looking for a person that has discipline, that has self-control, that can absorb the training and then go out into the field and apply it in ridiculously insane situations where people are on drugs, they're on alcohol, they're emotionally upset, and they're at the worst day of their life. And how can we go in there and act as a peace officer, which is really what we are, to restore the peace, and do it in a way that's fair and goes by the laws and policies and procedures that we all know.
Sure.
So when we do that, generally things work out fine. It's those times where they don't follow the training, the laws, policies, procedures that we typically have a problem.
Right. John, who do you look for?
Well, it's funny, you know, I've been serving on interview panels since probably 1992 as a sergeant, as a police chief, you know, in various roles. Number one, we look for people with the right character. They have to have the right character to be able to operate within our values, our shared values, and to have the character to not have those values corrupted by circumstances, by changing dynamics, by the behavior of someone else. People sometimes behave in a way that is very difficult to love them. Right? We deal with people, as the chief said, in very challenging circumstances.
Yeah.
But yet, to treat every human being with love, dignity, and respect, regardless of their circumstance, that's the kind of people that we need to have. So how do you vet that? Certainly in the hiring process, the background process, the psychological process, the polygraph process. We're trying to validate that these people have the character necessary to perform this very difficult job in very difficult circumstances at times. But I'm not going to short sell it either. It's a very rewarding career. We get paid to help people. Sometimes we help people on their best days. Sometimes we help people on their very worst days. We have to hold people accountable. We enforce the law. We write tickets. We arrest people. You can arrest somebody. You can even use force on somebody and still treat them with the dignity and respect that they're due, not only under the Constitution, but under our shared values.
You know, you mentioned, you already kind of spoke to the difference between policing, which is about the same, whether it doesn't matter if you're in 20 below or 75 degrees, you may wear something different, but it's the same values, same structure. So you answer kind of my question. My next question is really maybe difficult, but you know, your toughest days. I can only imagine if it's obviously the death of an officer and having to communicate that to a family member. How would you characterize tough days? I mean, you may have, 3 tough days a week and nobody knows that. How would you characterize it, John?
Well, certainly, the death of one of your teammates is very challenging. We lost a trooper 2 years ago in a motor vehicle accident, and I arrived at the funeral home the same time that his widow did, and that was a tough day.
Yeah,
but we rallied around the family. We rallied around the teammates in that part of the state where that happened. And, I always say something about these troopers, and first of all, I have to point out a distinction. So for 29 years or so, I was a police officer. Well, for the last 4 years, I've been a trooper. So my team will be very proud of that distinction. So when our troopers, I say this about them, we've been through some amazing challenges in the last 4 years since I've been here.
Yeah.
The worst natural disaster in the state's history with epic flooding in 2019, where we literally rescued 168 people from drowning. I mean, it was that challenging. But we've lost a trooper in a car crash. We lost a trooper to suicide. We lost a trooper to cancer. We lost a trooper to a heart attack, all in a 2-year period. The bigger the mass, the better these folks perform in coming together, supporting one another. And I think that's universal in law enforcement. The brotherhood and sisterhood of coming together gets us through those difficult days. But I also say it's not just the loss of a teammate. It's the experiences that we have, the shared trauma, the cumulative trauma. I still remember the day in 1992, I was an acting supervisor, and my team, 4 of my officers had just been on a call, and it was a medical call, and I wasn't able to monitor the outcome of it. But when I got back to the office, the 4 officers were there stripping off their gear, their vests, their uniforms, because they were drenched in sweat. And they looked like they had seen a ghost. I mean, they were pale, they were physically ill. They had a 2-year-old die in their arms who choked on an apple, and they could not get it out. They tried all the medical techniques that they possibly could until the ambulance got there. The ambulance tried to extract this piece of fruit from this child's airway and were physically unable to. That trauma that those folks shared, I know it carried with them, to the end of their careers, even the end of their lives. One of those officers, a friend of mine, passed away recently from cancer. And that's 34 years ago or 30 years ago. But those are tough days. Yeah. And when you're in a leadership position as a supervisor at that time, I felt the pain of my teammates, what they had to go through. Yeah. But there's those things happen every week, literally. Yeah. And you support one another, you work together as a team, and you overcome those things together. And that goes into the whole issue of officer wellness, which we could spend a whole hour on. Yeah. But we're so much better as a profession in recognizing those signs of trauma and even depression. Yeah. And the things that we need to survive emotionally and mentally in a very challenging career. Yeah.
Thanks for mentioning that. And you're right, we are going to spend an hour on officer wellness. I think one fallacy, and I think, Mark pointed out how movies color officers into some superhuman caricature, which is not real. Every day, these are husbands, wives, sons, daughters going to work, dealing with just horrific circumstances in that 2% of the time when there's intense action and 98% of boredom and paperwork, and then having to do it all over again, whether you're a supervisor or a leader or not. So, Mark, I'm sure you share some of John's sentiments. Anything unique that jumps out at your experience here at the port?
Well, some brilliant leader that I worked for used to say, we're in a human endeavor and we hire human beings, right? So sometimes mistakes get made. And I echo all those sentiments. And sometimes I just think it's the day-to-day grind that wears officers down and troopers after years and years and years. And, I always say too, there's 3 tiers to the justice system. There's, policing and law enforcement, and then there's the prosecutorial and defense side of it, and then there's the correctional side of it. And what I know frustrates officers day to day is we literally arrest the same people over and over and over and over again. It's actually very few people that commit most of the crimes, if you look at the data. And we don't seem to do a good job in this kind of world we live in with all this data, really narrowing down who these folks are, why are they committing these crimes, why are they constantly out there causing all these problems, and really with pinpoint accuracy, working them either through the correctional system or what other rehabilitation they might need, drug counseling, alcohol counseling, mental help with mental illness. And so the officers kind of see that, like, it's what was that one movie where the day happens over and over and over, Groundhog Day, that they tend to be doing the same things every day. And it literally, and I'm seeing it more, it just wears them out, wears them down. So you get this thing called compassion fatigue, which is an excuse, but I often wonder why you see officers acting badly or behaving or treating someone badly. Ask a couple questions like, are they suffering from, compassion fatigue themselves? Or how are they treated at work? Do they feel supported? Do they feel like they can go out and they have the tools to do their job? You start asking those questions, because I think over a long period of time, it can be very wearing. And so we know officers typically have higher suicide rates. They get divorced more. They have alcohol and drug addictions. They die earlier after they retire. We know these things through years and years of study. I think a lot of that has to do with what the chief pointed out, or the superintendent pointed out, John pointed out, the cumulative trauma over a course of a long career can be very wearing on you mentally and emotionally. So we do rely on things like peer support and understanding what happens to your body when you go out on patrol, for example, and then come back. There's this thing called hypervigilance, where most people aren't in the fight or flight mentality all the time, but officers are, and that's actually not good for you. And there's a book called Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement that we give to almost every officer that talks about that. Because I remember getting off patrol at 3 a.m. as a gang officer in South Central LA. I couldn't sleep for hours. You'd think I'd be tired, but I was just so pumped up on adrenaline for such a long time. And then you crash afterwards, and it's not good for your heart. It's not good for your health in the long term.
Right. Yuriman, thank you for spending so much time, both of you, on mental wellness of the human beings that we ask to do this extraordinary superhero work, 7 days a week. Looking back at some of the social justice issues, I wonder if you've instituted any practices or anything different in your departments that you would like to point to as a lesson learned, as something that worked that other departments can benefit from. Mark, we'll stay with you, and then we'll move to John.
Sure. Well, certainly I mentioned the stand down training that we did, and that continues really with, we're trying to get every officer in this county trained on what we call de-escalation training. Right. Essentially, when they get to a scene, they learn different techniques to try to reduce the tension, reduce the anxiety, try to understand the call, take more time, get more resources, recognize what type of call it is, what they're dealing with, use time to their advantage, use communication techniques to their advantage, get the right resources in. And so I think that is important. But more like on the social justice side, we've done quite a few interesting things here in San Diego County, but I'll tell you some things in my department. The second or third night of the rioting and the unrest, I rode with a black sergeant, and he was getting called horrible, vulgar names, having things, yelled at him. Of course, people are throwing stuff at us, spitting at us, all those kind of things. But it struck me that I have no idea how this sergeant feels in this situation. I could not relate. So I ended up meeting with all my black employees, and we've been meeting about quarterly ever since. And they have given me such an interesting perspective about being a black person in the United States and then a black officer. And there was recently an article, I think it was in LA Times, that talked about Black officers being caught in the middle,
Yeah.
getting at their family and friends. Why are you in policing?
Yeah.
Why are you working for an unjust racist system?
Right.
So they feel a lot of pressure. There's things, that they're trying to grasp and deal with. And so, I can only try to understand, what they are going through and what they've been going through. So, that's kind of one thing we did internally, recognizing the issue with our Black officers. One of the things we're about to launch is something called 30 by 30, which is 30% women on our department by the year 2030. And what we did was we kind of looked at one in terms of, diversity, equity, inclusion. We kind of looked at like women are only 12% of most law enforcement agencies nationally, but yet they're 50% of the population. There's also been studies done that show women might not think about being police officers, but when they become police officers, they have very good communication skills, very good empathy skills, investigative skills. They tend to use less force and are able to de-escalate situations. So, one idea is the more women we can get into law enforcement, it'll probably help a lot. And also that will help us in what they call a multidimensional approach. Also, when you hire more women, it gives you access to more communities with different makeups, and help your minority hiring, for example. So those are two things. And then on the regional level, we joined a group, all the chiefs did, called Stand in the Gap, which was started by primarily Black pastors in South San Diego, and a lot of heart-to-heart meetings with them monthly. And the sheriff came, the DA came, the chief at San Diego PD came. So really helping them understand, us understand their perspective, and then show them what we were doing, because we were actually doing a lot of things, but not getting much in the media or in the press about all the positive things we were doing, all the practical things we were doing to change some of those perceptions. One was, for example, to ban the carotid restraint, which is sometimes mislabeled a chokehold. Just things like that we're able to kind of lessen the anxiety in the community and things that they had been concerned about for years. So we did a lot of community and listening. We had some town halls and just essentially listened to what people were saying, which I think was helpful, and then acted on some of their concerns.
Wow. That's amazing. That's a fantastic lineup of immediate action that you took. I think that's awesome. John, what's been going on in Nebraska after the George Floyd incident?
Well, I'm happy to talk about that. It's interesting because a lot of my colleagues from around the country assumed that we had no spillover from the incident and the unrest in other parts of the country, when in reality, it was several nights of very significant unrest, riots. We had several $1 million damaged in the very first night of the riots in downtown Lincoln, Nebraska. It's the middle of the country. We're not that far from Minneapolis, and we're not that far from Chicago and Kansas City and other major cities. So we were not immune from it. So, it hit home. And after things had settled down, there was a very large hue and cry. And I'm going to take a little different perspective and focus on this aspect of it. Our officers were pretty significantly impacted. Our troopers were pretty impacted by those events. For example, the same gas station that they had stopped at for a coffee or a can of Coke or a chew. I don't know if you have that out in San Diego, but that's chewing tobacco.
I've heard about it. Yeah, I've heard about it. Yeah.
The same place they've been stopping for 10 or 20 years in the same town.
Yeah.
Now the clerk wouldn't talk to them, and in some cases wouldn't even wait on them.
Wow.
And dirty looks from customers and bad, just some really bad vibes. And so the thing that was really important for us as an organization was to reaffirm the nobility of policing,
right?
Justness of their cause, that the notion or the narrative that somehow policing is broken. It is not. No, we're not perfect.
No.
We have to constantly evolve and move forward and get better, right? As in any organization or any business. Okay, so I'm not denying that there are issues. I'm not denying that there is racism in law enforcement. As long as we hire people to do this job, there will be racists in certain places.
Sure.
And we can't be naive enough to say, well, not in our organization.
Yeah.
No, we have to constantly be on guard for that. So we had to reaffirm to our folks, you're not broken, right? We have a lot of work to do to regain the trust that was essentially destroyed by the actions of one man. Now, you'd argue that there were others involved. Yep, I get that. But if not for the actions of that one man, the lack of intervention of the other three wouldn't have been necessary.
Right.
Right.
Sure.
But that's another discussion that we can go down that path toward. But we took inventory. There was a movement going around. It was called 8 Can't Wait. 8 policies or 8 recommended improvements for law enforcement that must be implemented to help with these issues. And we took stock of those, and I can't cite them all for you, but body camera, de-escalation, chokeholds, mental health training, this positional asphyxia, I believe was one of those, the duty to intervene policy, and the reporting aspect. And there might have been another one. That might be more than 8.
Yeah.
I don't have to pick it out. But we looked at that list and we matched it up to our policies and procedures.
Yeah.
And we were like 7 for 8.
Wow.
We didn't need to make any changes because for years we've been training de-escalation.
Right.
The only policy we changed was the chokehold or the carotid restraint, which we look back through our records. We keep very detailed records on use of force. We couldn't find a single use of a carotid restraint or a chokehold in the last 7 years. We don't use it, but it was still on the books. And we said, you know what? Be responsive to the community, we're taking it off the books.
Right.
We don't train it anymore. We don't use it. Let's take it off the books and say, you can't use this unless, of course, you're in some kind of deadly force situation.
Right. Right.
So that was a response to the community saying, this doesn't meet our standards.
Right.
And we stepped up to that. The only other policy we changed was the duty to intervene. We had a policy about duty to intervene, but it was more on you have a duty to report.
Right.
If you see misconduct, you must report it.
Right.
Well, we changed it to say you must intervene and report.
Right. Right.
So those are the only 2 policy changes of those 8. We had just implemented a $5 million body camera program in the state of Nebraska for state troopers.
Right.
We've been doing de-escalation training for years. The mental illness training, recognizing mental illness, addressing it, dealing with it, and then the duty to care policy. When you put the handcuffs on somebody, you're responsible for their welfare. That policy has been on the books for years. We enforce it. We train it. We make sure that people don't go to jail in distress. They go to medical facilities if they're in distress. They get to decide. The medical experts decide if this person is well enough to go to jail. So in a way, it was an affirmation that we had been practicing what we call best practices for years in our organization, and it was a sense of pride. But the converse of that was we were being labeled as a corrupt, racist institution and agency, and we had to really work hard with our folks to say, look, you're not broken.
Yeah.
We do have room to grow and improve, always. It's a continuous improvement process. But we have to keep up the good work of serving the public, and yes, even arresting people, and yes, even arresting people of color, because it's all based on behavior. If someone behaves in a way that's outside the boundaries of the law, they must be dealt with by law enforcement.
Sure. No, thank you for mentioning some of those. I love the acronyms 30 by 30, 8 by 8. I won't forget it. One last question before we run off. Looking ahead, what do you think some of the biggest issues facing policing will be? What do you want to invest the most of your time in while you're doing this? And John, we'll stay with you to finish.
Well, right now, the biggest challenge is recruitment and retention. And I'll go back to something that Mark said, diversity recruitment, women, minorities. We've been very intentional about it since I arrived here in Nebraska. And we've done I think, a very commendable job in recruiting Hispanics and Latinos, which make up a large percentage of our population here in Nebraska. We've had great success in connecting with those communities. Very, very poor success in connecting with the Black community. I believe in our 4 years, so that would be about 8 training academies. I believe we've onboarded 3 African American or Black troopers.
Wow.
Now, the population is relatively low by comparison to the Latino population, but we are having a very difficult time connecting. And what we are hearing from our Black community members, especially young men and women whom we're trying to recruit, I'll be viewed as a traitor in my community.
Yeah.
No thanks.
Right.
And so we really need to work to change that narrative. Because on one hand, we're being criticized. You don't have enough Black officers.
Right.
On the second hand, we are doing our level best to recruit, and yet there are barriers in the way that we can't seem to break down. So this is where we are reaching out to our Black community and saying, we need your help. We need your help to destigmatize the notion that your young men and women will somehow be betraying their community by becoming public servants, by becoming law enforcement officers.
Right.
So that's going to be a long process.
Right.
But take the minority recruitment aside, just convincing young men and women coming out of college, coming out of the military, to join us in law enforcement is a huge challenge all across the country right now. See how the narrative has been spun to say somehow it's a corrupt institution. That is completely false.
Right.
That is a bold-faced lie.
Yeah.
Again, not perfect.
Yeah.
So how do we overcome that? And I don't have all the answers. If I did, I would write a book, make $1 million.
Right.
But it's something that we're constantly asking our community, how can we help you help us? And that will be an ongoing dialogue, but it is the #1 challenge probably for the next 5 years.
Right.
For all of law enforcement, state, federal, local, every part of the country.
Wow. Mark, biggest issue facing you or what you see in policing?
So, well, let me give you the good news. Crime is still some of the lowest it's ever been in 25 years. And I'm talking mean street crime, murders, assaults, robberies, burglaries, all that. It's almost the lowest it's been in 25 years. So that's really positive. A lot of that has gone into the cyber world. You know, probably most have been the victims of identity theft. I just got a letter this weekend from the Ohio Department of Jobs and Families saying that my unemployment benefits were running out. So apparently my name unemployment benefits in Ohio.
Wow.
Which I just had to report. So, you know, the nature of crime shifting, like why rob a store when I can steal somebody's credit card or I can hack into your computer and get into your something like that.
Right.
So honestly, if you look at the data, we're not where we need to be in attacking the cybercrime problem. And I don't think many local police departments really are, and the federal government, federal law enforcement agencies are really overwhelmed by it. But the good news is you probably less of a chance to be a victim of a crime in the street. Now, I would say in certain neighborhoods or areas, that might not be the case. There might be certain geographic areas that are having a problem. And that's where also we have to stop looking at everything as a police problem. And we have to start focusing on why are these areas have these problems and focus the right economic, educational, social resources toward those areas if you want to reduce crime. But I think this is something John and I were, been talking about for 20, 30 years. Everything got made a police problem. Homelessness got made a police problem. Mental illness got made a police problem. Alcohol got made a police problem. Now, certainly, most of the people that we arrest probably have drug or alcohol in their system. They're mentally ill. I mean, it's something like 60, 70% or more. But it's really, if you don't want it to be a police problem, what resources are we putting into those things to try to help people solve those problems, which will lead to a reduction in crime, particularly domestic violence, those street crimes. So I think really what we've kind of been learning, we're trying to do is take a more holistic approach. And the chief and I, for example, we hired a nonprofit when we were at Port of San Diego called the Alpha Project. with the officers on homeless outreach, trying to get, so you just didn't have to arrest them or give them the ticket. You gave them the opportunity to get into housing or get into a drug or alcohol treatment program or get into a jobs program. So we were able to help people through that program. So I think really the future is, how do we work with other government and non-government agencies in law enforcement to try to solve those problems, and then also stop problems before they begin. One of the things we do at Harbor Police is we have a foundation now called San Diego Harbor Police Foundation. And one of the missions is to go into Barrio Logan, particularly Perkins K through 8 school, and have officers in the classroom regularly. And we've put furniture in three of their 4 special ed classrooms now, and we're doing a 4th one soon. So we're trying to push resources into the school and also create a relationship between the officers and law enforcement and the school and the neighborhood that's a positive relationship. So the first time they see an officer, it's not for a negative thing or because their parents got arrested or they got in trouble. Trying to create relationships with the community and looking at kind of a longer term solutions instead of the short term. Oh, let's just throw them in jail, which, we see doesn't work.
Right.
So I just say taking those more holistic approaches is really the future.
Well, this is great. Thank you so much. John, Mark, like I said, I've always admired you too and the way you conduct yourselves as public servants, as leaders. I've learned a lot from you. I'm grateful for your time, for your public service, and for your wise counsel in keeping this conversation going today. I really think it's an important conversation. I believe in everything you guys are doing, and the value of law enforcement is really what keeps this country great. I really, coming from another part of the world, I've always thought what makes this country great is that knowing that you can sleep at night, that you have such professional public servants, at a beckons call, where a lot of parts of the world are not like that. Mark served in Iraq, so we know the rest of the world doesn't live like that. And here we are dealing with these tough issues. As Mark said, everything gets made a police issue. And I think police are not designed to solve every problem, but certainly as public servants, they play a critical role in making our quality of life in this country as good as it is. So thank you, Superintendent, Chief. I hope you'll continue to join this conversation and help us learn more about law enforcement.
Great. Thank you, Shahryar.
Thank you, Shahryar, for giving us the opportunity to talk to you today.
Thanks, guys.